What you're saying is that a coach or a leader is somebody who joins somebody as a companion on the journey.
Exactly. And that's potentially a new way of thinking about leadership, because it is often thought about in that more kind of mentoring way.
Cody Royle.
Cody Royle.
Author and coach to the coaches Cody Royle.
Bill Belichick, he didn't play professional football, but he's still able to join those players and work on solutions through them and find success. There are so many posts, memes, blogs, research studies on trait theory of leaders. It's a good starting point for anyone who's looking to lead anyone into anything, is an ability to.
Leaders and coaches are often concerned with the performance of people in their team, but I've heard you say that coaches are performers themselves. Can you explain what you mean?
Think of our leaders as performers. They are participants in the game just as much as our players are. I'm not sure you can kind of sit there and say, all great leaders do this. I actually think what they do have is.
Can I throw a quote at you first of all, out of the door? This is a quote from author John C. Maxwell. He says, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you can build on top of it. I think a leader might also be someone who is finding the way with you. In my world, in professional sports, that's often the way. They haven't actually been there before, so they might not have played necessarily, particularly in the North American sports. They may not have won a championship before, and so you can't say they know the way necessarily. But I think a modern leader is someone who's willing to acknowledge that and say, yeah, but I'm come with me still. We're going to find the way together, because I've got a pretty good idea of how this might come together. And so, yeah, I can't fully subscribe to the quote, but I think it's close.
So what you're saying is that a coach or a leader is somebody who joins somebody as a companion on the journey as such.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, that's potentially a new way of thinking about leadership, because it is often thought about, in that more kind of mentoring way, right? Like you have to have been there and done that to be able to lead others. I don't subscribe to that. And particularly in sport, there are plenty of examples of where that's not true. One of the most famous being, Bill Belichick. He didn't play professional football, played Division 3 football. And so everyone who says, you need to have been there and done that, well, he's never blocked anyone in the NFL in his life or played in front of 100,000 people, but he's still able to join those players and work on solutions through them and find success.
Well, Bill Belichick is somebody even a non-sports aficionado like myself would have heard of down through the years. Looking at somebody like him and indeed other great leaders and coaches, what would the basic traits or skills be that they would have that would enable them to be able to be so charismatic that they could take other people along with them on that journey, as I said, to success and progress and optimization?
This is an interesting one. There are so many posts, memes, blogs, research studies on essentially trait theory of leaders. I have a hard time with that. I don't subscribe to trait theory. I think if you look at the traits of leaders, they're on such a wide spectrum of those who've managed to have people follow them into whatever cause, political, sporting, your world in health, that I'm not sure you can kind of sit there and say, all great leaders do this, all great leaders have these traits. I actually think what they do have is a high level of self-awareness, a really high level of self-awareness, and the self-awareness actually breaks into two categories. There is a social component. It's not all about me. It actually has a social component. You've got to understand how others are interpreting you, and how you fit into a group is part of social self-awareness as well. And so I think they're often high on those. And that's a good starting point for anyone who's looking to lead anyone into anything, is to know yourself a little bit, but also know how you're perceived by the particular group that you're looking to lead.
Well, that's really interesting. You preempted my next question because it was all about self awareness and that propensity towards self analysis, because it's a theme that comes back again and again and again in all of these self help books that I've read down the last 3 or 4 years. And yes, self awareness certainly seems to be key. What about compassion and empathy too? I'm sure that's probably an extension of that ability to be able to connect with other people and part of that analysis that we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And, empathy in particular in my world, in team sports, where you're now dealing with global teams, like whether that's in basketball, football, we're talking, 10, potentially 20 different social backgrounds. And if you break those social backgrounds apart in terms of, it might just be how someone interprets leadership, because you and I are talking about the Western version of what we perceive, but that's not the same as a multitude of other versions of leadership, and cultural ideas of uh, how you speak to a leader, how you interact with a leader. Those are different in Asian cultures. They're different in Polynesian cultures. And so the ability to empathize and understand, and whether you can fully walk a mile in those people's shoes or not, I think is maybe beside the point. It's an ability to try to comprehend the lens that they're viewing something through. And that's particularly tricky now because we are a global society. And so you're being asked to lead people from so many varying backgrounds of cultural ideas. And I've just talked about leadership. There's a whole range of other things that are viewed differently in those different cultures as well, that you've got to try to understand and navigate through.
Well, this is true not just in sport, but in other fields too, because of the facility to be able to work like we are now over the internet, remotely, and people tend to have work colleagues in different offices in different parts of the world. So that multicultural aspect to jobs now, and that need to be conscious of how you interact with other people from different cultures is more important, I think, now than ever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sitting here talking to you, Matthew, and I'm in Toronto, Ontario. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. My wife's from Sligo. When we go home, it's, even if we look at just the socio-cultural dynamic within Ireland, right? It's changing, and changing fast, and there's new people emigrating. There's new cultures that are arriving that have these different ideas, different ways of life, and it makes for a richer society. And so, yeah, understanding that dynamic, whilst also being able to plug into yourself and understand, yeah, have that self-awareness piece, is the modern leadership. It's where everyone is going. It's where everyone's talking about. It's where all the research money is going. Is, now that we've created this global society, how do we lead these different groups?
Well, leaders and coaches are often concerned with the performance of people in their team, but I've heard you say that coaches are performers themselves. Can you explain what you mean by this?
Yeah, there's this idea that kind of emerged, you know, probably through a lot of militaristic thinking, of just the leader as a servant. And what that became was, that the workaholism was fine because it was in service of the team and making sure that they could perform, and going above and beyond. And essentially we've ended up with this unintentional kind of landscape at the moment, both in business and in sport, and the military kind of went through it and avoided it a little bit, but where we're just burning out our leaders. And so then they can't serve anyone because they're burnt out. They're just done. And, I think where we need to move towards, particularly in professional sport, where workaholism and individualism amongst leadership is still rife, is to think of our leaders as performers. They are participants in the game just as much as our players are. And so what we know from all of the science on knowledge workers, on athletic performers, on experts in basically any field that we can find, is that their performance matters. And when we do knowledge work and you decimate your ability to use your brain, like with little sleep, with poor nutrition, with a lack of understanding of, say, what time zones do to your ability to mentally perform, we need those things back. And so we need to better map the performance environment of our coaches, of our business leaders, so that we can start to introduce some of those things. Because, for instance, a lack of sleep impacts your ability to be self-aware and to adequately reflect on yourself. And so when you say, I can work 20-hour days and I'm still performing at a high level, the answer to that is no, you can't. And even more so, your team knows that you are exhausted and drained and moody, and they pick up on it and they think less of you, is what the research says.
Talking of sleep, have you read that terrific book, Why We Sleep, by Professor Matthew Walker?
Mm-hmm.
Have you read
Yeah,
that? Yeah,
I have. Yeah.
It's such a fabulous book. It really is. And I'm saying this to anybody listening out there because I rave about it constantly. And he makes the statement in the book that sleeping, I think, only 4 or 5 hours a night is equivalent to drink driving the following morning because you're so cognitively impaired. And so absolutely, you're preaching to the converted as far as the importance of sleep and performance is concerned. I have worked in media for about 15 years, and communication mastery is key to be good in media. Communication mastery is central to being a leader. Talk to me about this and about how mastery of communication separates a good leader from a great leader.
Yeah, well, can we start at the top and say that the traditional idea of communication needs some adjustment, and I've written about this in the tough stuff. The fact that, that we talk about the big 5, right, in communication, so verbal, written, et cetera, listening, but they don't capture self-talk. So the actual communication that takes place the most is within your own mind. And so there's various different estimations on how many words you speak to yourself, but it's in the tens of thousands, I think we can safely assume. And then also behavior as a way of communication. And so it's really a big 7 that we're talking about. And so when we talk about communication, we can't leave those 2 out because they probably communicate the most to other people and ourselves of any of the kind of key styles of leadership. Of communication, sorry. And so let's start there. We need to address those 2 because we need to bundle them into communication that we're working on. And then second to that is I would link it back to what we were just talking about. There's a lot of studies on the impact of, say, sleep deprivation on your ability to just audibly communicate. And one of them that's particularly compelling for anyone that does knowledge work, so, CEOs and executives, as well as coaches in sport, is sleep deprivation has been shown to severely impact your ability to choose the right words to use and your ability to intonate. Now, when you're talking about either presenting, like you do, professionally, and your ability to intonate and understand how to communicate a particular message, as well as a coach, for instance, who's, yes, you've got your team talks that are kind of a little bit glorified in their impact. But your ability to have a one-on-one or a small group, a conversation with a group of players or your coaches and choose the right words and intonate in the right way has become probably never more important, because they can actually be interpreted as abuse if you use the wrong words and you use the wrong intonation. And so those two things linked together. We're talking about you and your sleep, lifestyle choices that you're making around your own performance has a severe impact potentially on your ability to communicate with the right language and the right intonation. And so that's just another small example of how we need to start to think about ourselves as performers. We need to look at our nutrition, our sleep, our alcohol consumption, our fulfillment in other areas of life, because the impact is on outcomes like our ability to talk and listen, and our self-talk and our behavior and how demonstrative we are, that they communicate a lot more than we think they do to other people.
I'm interested to ask you a little bit more about the power of listening. I always say we have two ears and one mouth. We have two ears for a reason, and yet most of us spend most of our time talking rather than listening. How important is it for a good leader and a good coach to be a good, empathetic, and compassionate listener?
So Simon Sinek named his second or third book, Leaders Eat Last. I actually think a better one would be Leaders Talk Last. And it's just not the way, is it? We think about, we walk into a meeting, and so we're in the meeting room and there's 10 of us and it's the project team, and we're trying to get this new app released out into the app store or whatever it may be, and everyone sits down and they just wait for the leader to speak and to take the reins. And it really should be the other way around. The leader should be the one who gathers everyone's perspectives on whatever it is that we're tackling, can point out, can catch the good within what we're doing, the great effort, can maybe direct the conversation once we've all had a chance, or the right people have had a chance to speak. And so, yeah, that skill of listening and intentional listening and trying to gather important information so that when you do speak, it has real cut through and is actually informed speaking. I think, again, is just the sign of a great modern leader, is that they'll actually sit there in silence for a lot of the time. And it's quite striking because people aren't used to that, but it allows you to approach whatever it is you're working on from a position of power and of information, because you've spent the time to listen.
It reminds me of that TV program where the CEO goes back to the shop floor but does so incognito to get a sense of what's happening at the very granular level of the company that he owns.
Exactly. Yeah. And those are such great examples because they're so removed from that level of operation. It's kind of, the joke is that the executives sit in the ivory tower, or the business owner sits in the ivory tower. That is not a good thing, that has become a joke, that you are so far removed from us up in your ivory tower that you don't actually understand how your own business operates. And that's what makes that show so compelling.
No, absolutely. It's one of my favorite programs for that very reason. You mentioned your book, The Tough Stuff. Tough Stuff. In that book, you look at emotion and the role it plays in detracting from a coach's performance. What exactly is happening in the mind of a coach or leader or a person who falls victim to emotion in this context, such that it affects their performance negatively?
Yeah, well, this is how I got into really working in, I call it coaching performance. So looking at the coach as a performer, it came through the emotional lens. So I'd coached for 15 years. I coached Aussie Rules or AFL. And unfortunately, we had a player take his own life. And so, I thought I knew everything there was to know about coaching. I was 15 years in as a head coach. You know a few things by then, but this situation threw me through a loop where I hadn't considered the emotional toll of leadership. I just thought it was part of it. And so, yeah, the emotion links very closely to my own experience. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And the first thing that I would say is I really dislike the narrative that emotion is bad, or it's bad for decision making, or don't make emotional decisions, or don't be emotional. It's part of the human condition, whether you like it or not. And this idea of coaches in particular being some monk on the sideline who kind of doesn't show any emotion and makes rational decisions, I don't think is really giving us a full picture of humanity. I'm interested in whole humans, and so that comes with the emotions that come with it. But where I think we need to go with that is understanding how those emotions manifest in us as individuals, because how I perceive pressure, for instance, in a pressure situation is going to be very different to how you experience it. And we might actually be in the same game. You might be sitting next to me as my assistant coach. You're feeling pressure in a completely different way, and it's manifesting a completely different way for you as it is for me. And so, again, it goes back to that awareness piece of really interrogating ourselves and how we interact with things like pressure, how we interact with things like stress, how we, particularly men, deal with anger, because it comes whether we want it to or not. It's another thing that I have issues with at the moment, in that we're still trying to just suppress men's anger, but it comes anyway. And any man will tell you that you can talk about just saying, oh, just don't get angry, but it bubbles up to the surface. So again, it's learning skills to deal with that anger, just like we try to learn skills to deal with pressure, just as we try to learn skills to deal with our own thinking and guide our thinking and mindfulness. And so, I'm passionate about us really diving into learning about our emotions so that we can interact with them, not suppress them, because they are helpful and they're there for a reason, and we need to acknowledge that.
Okay, so while we may very well deal with emotions and pressure in an individualistic way, is there any universal tip or a piece of advice to help people out there who are listening in, to help them deal with pressure in a pressurized work-related situation?
Yeah, the best way that I know how is to pay attention to your attention. So where does your attention go when you feel like you're in a pressurized situation? So does it go to things that aren't relevant to the task? Does it go to yourself? Does it go to other people? Does it, uh, how are you reacting? And if, this is where I think journaling can be quite interesting, is if you diarize those thoughts and where your attention goes over a period of time, you'll start to see some trends for yourself. And so again, it's not a prescription holistically that everyone can deal with pressure in the same way, but what everyone can do in the same way is pay attention to what they're thinking about and write those thoughts down, good or bad. It's a non-judgmental thing. What you're looking to do is capture over a period of time. It might only be a week, but over a period of time, you'll start to see certain trends with yourself that you can then again go back and interrogate and say, oh geez, that's come up every day that I've, in every high pressure meeting that we've been in, I've talked less, or I haven't been able to focus on the task that we're doing. I'm thinking about picking my kids up. Isn't that interesting? And what might I be able to do to rectify that? And so again, it allows us to interact with it a little bit more, rather than just when it's not written down, it's not hard, and it's difficult to see those trends.
And following on from that, then, how does a performer, a leader, or a coach deal or cope with disappointments, setbacks, or perceived failures whenever it seems that that is the opposite of what they're striving for as far as their goals are concerned?
Yeah, and it depends on what those goals are. But I think there's two things. One within sport that I really look at is we have to remember that we're in competition. So whilst we've kind of gone through this mindset change of control the controllables and it's only our performance that matters, at the end of the day, there's an opposition out there that train as much as us, have access to all the same information and all the same preparation and all the same best practices and all the same fitness drills and all the same skill drills that we do. And so they are just as prepared for the competition as we are. And so this idea of if we get everything right, we'll win is a bit of a nonsense idea because the opposition get to respond. It's a little bit different to a business challenge where you're kind of dealing with a bit of a market. And the reality is if you put out a good product, there's a fair chance that people are going to buy it. Whereas in sport, you can actually have your best performance and lose. The opposition get one shot on goal in a football match and score from that, and you don't score. And so, again, it's this idea of what success actually is and acknowledging that, particularly in elite sport, where we're in competition and they get to respond. And so that makes achievement the hardest thing that's possible. And so there's a little bit of perspective there, perspective taking, I think, in dealing with disappointment and setbacks. And just acknowledging that we're trying to do really difficult things and that the reason that they're difficult is why we like winning them. So that's the first one, is some perspective taking. This is really difficult and this is what makes it worth it. And we didn't get it this time, but what can we do next time? And then the second one is to zoom out. When you look at successes and failures on a different time scale from the one that you're currently on, again, it adds a new perspective to how you interpret it. And so it might be that you made the final four of the competition, but didn't quite get to, the All Islands. And you're disappointed and that's a setback. But when you zoom out and look at where you've come from and the fact that you maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place based on, whether it's just the size of the county or the budget or the whatever it may be, you can now start to look at that. That might actually be a success when you zoom out a little bit. And, I think it's true a lot of the time when you zoom out, you can see the progress a lot more clearly than when you're zoomed in and you're just dealing with, but we lost this one game. And so those are two things that I would look at straight away for people is let's acknowledge that this is really hard and this is why we enjoy doing it. And so the result didn't go our way this time, but it will next time if we keep believing in this team and this group and these people. And then second is when you get a chance, after feeling the loss and feeling how difficult it is, make sure you zoom out, because when you look at that different time scale, like a longer term vision of where you've come from and where you are now, often there's tremendous progress that you need to acknowledge as well.
And would you use these two components also in order to help you maintain motivation, even when things are going well for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I tend to work with teams that are not just interested in winning once. The projects that I take on when someone comes to me and says, we want to create a juggernaut. And that's most interesting to me because that is the hardest thing to do in my world, in sport, is to win and then win and then win and then win, because the motivations of the people change over time. And it's what makes what Dublin have done, for instance, regardless of what you think about it in football, is what they have done is won and won and won and won with essentially a group that has stayed together. And as their motivations have changed and they went from being, 24, 25-year-old young men to parents, even that change would have changed things, right? And in terms of their motivators and what was important to them. And so as they're evolving as human beings, they're also staying motivated to continue to chase this really, really tough thing to do. And I think that's the most compelling thing is not just once, but how do we do it over and over again, because the motivation needs to stay high. And so, zooming in, zooming out, looking at different time scales, acknowledging that what we're doing is really tough, but that's what makes it worth it. Those are elements that can keep particular groups nose to the grindstone, so that they keep doing the work that they need to do and keep innovating even through that success, rather than stopping and thinking the same thing they did last year is going to get them the same result next year.
Just to put that Dublin reference into context for our international listeners, Dublin have won the All-Ireland National Football Contest here in Ireland multiple times in recent years, much to the chagrin of other teams in this country. And I suppose Dublin are similar to Brazil in football, who have a great record on the international stage, and New Zealand in rugby. And yes, much to the chagrin of their competitors. Can I ask you, talking about teams there, you mention in your other book, Where Others Won't, you talk about intelligent teams. These are teams that break rules and go above and beyond their competitors. What defines an intelligent team?
Well, I think they have an understanding of who they are and a methodology for how they want to achieve what they want to achieve. And so sometimes that's titles, but sometimes not. Sometimes it is progress, or sometimes it's to represent their community, but there's some real intelligence behind what they're doing. So, cogent thought, and the organizations often have alignment about what they're trying to do right the way through the organization. And so that allows them to be innovative, because often they're forced to be, but also innovation is often part of the fabric of who they are. And so it's not surprising when they do things that seem, kind of crazy to other organizations. To them, it's just part of who they are. And so it's not that crazy. I think that's what the intelligence is. And you see, there's a lot of examples right now of teams that are competing at levels far beyond their basic resources, because they have just used some intelligence and some thought into who are we and then what are we trying to achieve. And similarly, there's some very, very high profile teams. One who wears red shirts and plays football, that have no idea who they are, and their performance is so lackluster that it's shocking, and it's on the front page of a newspaper it's like for underperformance. And so that's what I mean when I talk about intelligence. Intelligence actually allows you to bat well above average.
We shall name no names. How much, I'm interested to ask you this, how much is success and performance and reaching our potential about embracing personal responsibility and doing the ugly work, the hard graft, and shouldering not just the labour required, but also the expectation too?
Yeah, I mean, I've changed my opinion on this. So my third book is called Second Set of Eyes, and it's about coaching coaches. So the work that I do now. And through doing the research into that, and really looking at health and high performance and decision making and awareness, it seems to me that being social animals and being part of tribes historically and groups now, and our ability, for social learning is really our superpower as a species. Right? It's the thing that we do better than anyone else in the animal kingdom. I actually think, whilst the helping yourself part is a good starting point, I actually think we also need to remember to come together as groups, and that's what that's how humans perform at a high level, is that we actually connect. And so whether that's the Harvard study, right, the one outcome out of 100 years of looking at health and learning, and was relationships, and lack of relationships being detrimental to health, and full relationships being what actually led to the people that lived the longest and their brain stayed healthy the longest. Right the way through to some of the decision-making science coming out of neuroscience, where pairs are actually best to make decisions. So it's not an individual who has individual biases or is susceptible to individual biases, or a group, like a large group, who are susceptible to social biases. It's a pairing. And so the way that I've come to look at this is, I think the self, so me, is a really good starting point. I've got to get off the couch at the end of the day. I've got to get motivated to get off the couch and understand my values and reflect on myself and strive for things. So that's the starting point. But then after that, I think there's a really compelling case for making sure that we enroll others in our journey as well, and go and get help from people, whether that's a coach at the gym that can help you just lift an extra couple of reps, or someone like yourself who's interviewed all these people and go and consult with you and, hey, can I have a coffee with you? Can you tell me what you've learned? Like maybe a mentoring relationship, or a relationship with your family. That's where I think the real high performance is actually coming back together as humans, because that's all we've got at the end of the day, is this shared humanity. And it turns out that we make each other better.
Very nicely put. I like that. I read another great book. Final question, by the way. I read another great book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it's all about growth mindset as opposed to a limiting or closed mindset. Can you talk to me and share any advice you have at all about how to foster a growth mindset on a consistent basis? Because what we used to motivate us yesterday to acquire a degree of growth may not work today, for example. So how do we continue to grow mentally in order to achieve those goals and optimize our performance in the long run?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would start with would be, I think a fixed mindset is also helpful in certain situations, right? Like where you are going for a particular goal, or there is a closed time scale on what you're trying to achieve, is you do actually need to be fixed. And so this, again, we tend to kind of take these ideas and say, like, this is good and this one's bad. And I don't really subscribe to that way of thinking necessarily. But for a lot of people, a growth mindset and the idea of essentially being able to take learnings out of whatever occurs in your life, either to you or for you, or as part of how you interact with the world, as being a learning opportunity and an opportunity for you to continue to grow and learn new things, I think is crucial, whether you're a leader, whether you're a performer, whether you're an individual performer, just looking to work on your ability to run a half marathon. This idea that you are accepting non-judgmentally of what happens to you, and you're interested in what that is trying to teach you, so that you can grow. I really think is one of the core pieces to actually realizing what we're calling high performance, because you've got to grow into that, and you actually need to take all the instances that have happened to you through your life perceived good or bad, and grab onto them and say, this is actually valuable for me because it's going to help me grow, even though it sucks right now and it doesn't feel very good. And I think that is difficult to do in the context of life and society and people telling you whether things are good or bad. And so I think my hope for people, if you're listening to this, if you've made it to the end, thank you. But also it is that having a growth mindset is hard because often you're told not to, or that something is good or bad or is not helpful for you. And so I think knowing that people are going to tell you that and sticking to this thing that people are telling me is bad is going to benefit me in some way in the future. Whether I can see what that way is now or not doesn't matter. Yeah, commit to it. Please, please, please stick with it because there are tremendous benefits to growing through that event that has happened to you. And it will come to fruition in the future in some way, shape, or form, whether you can see it or not.
So much great advice and an awful lot of value in there. Cody, give me the name of your 3 books again.
First one's called Where Others Won't. As you said, it's about teams that think differently. The second book is called The Tough Stuff. It's about the emotional toll of coaching in particular, but I've had people from emergency services principals say that they resonated with that. And the third one's called Second Set of Eyes, and it's about coaching head coaches in sport, or mentoring, what most people would call.
And if people want to reach out to you and find out more about you, where can they go?
The best part about me is with a name like Cody Royle, I'm very easy to find. So codyroyle.com is the easiest. I've got everything there, but also on social media, I've got all the handles, Cody Royle, at Cody Royle. So I'm very easy to find. And yeah, please do reach out to me and talk to me, email me, send me a tweet, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I use social media to be social. So.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts and experience with us today. Cody Royle, thank you.
Thanks for having me, mate.